Support for this podcast is brought to you by the Wyoming Humanities. We take a closer look at our human experiences and use stories to explore culture, history, and contemporary issues. You can find us on thinkwhy.org.
We would always go out on the front porch after dinner and tell stories, talk.
Hello, I'm Emmy DeGrappa, and this is What's Your Why? Each week we bring you stories asking our guests the question why. We learn about their passion, why they do what they do, why should we care, and what can we learn? What better place to explore the human landscape than from the state known for its incredible landscapes, Wyoming? And what better organization than Wyoming Humanities? Serving our state for over 45 years, we share stories, ideas, and wisdom about the human experience. Welcome to What's Your Why? Today we are talking to New York Times bestselling author Craig Johnson from Ucross, Wyoming. Welcome, Craig.
Good to be here.
And Craig likes to note that Ucross, Wyoming is population 25, right?
I am proud of the fact that I come from a town of 25. Yes, like that's most of the time whenever I'm touring, the first thing people ask is are there really only 25 people in Ucross? And the thing I have to tell them is honestly there are only 19 people in Ucross. We're kind of still inflated from the last census, but it costs a lot of money to change those signs, so we just leave it alone. So.
And then when you're traveling a lot, it's population 18, right?
It is. It drops down.
Yeah.
Generally, my wife goes with me all over the place. We just finished up like a 52 event tour, so I've been on the road for about 6 weeks now, like that. But she tries to go with me on the majority of the tour.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's ambitious of her. Our focus today is to talk to you about your personal journey as an accomplished writer and author. And how
that's making the assumption that I am an accomplished author and writer. So as long as we're going to go from that point, okay.
Well, if you're a New York Times bestselling author, I think I can
that
say
doesn't mean anything.
No, okay. Then we won't say that.
Okay.
But tell us how you got into writing.
I didn't come from a wealthy background. We didn't even have a television. And one of the things we would always do is we would always go out on the front porch after dinner and tell stories, talk. For me, I think it was just a question of going from telling stories to writing stories. My education was actually in writing, but I didn't let that get in the way of becoming a writer. And then, in all actuality, there's only two honest answers to the question, how did you become a writer? And the first one is that you run out of excuses. I built my own ranch. I poured the concrete, stacked the logs, built it all myself, got it all up and going like that, and then thought, okay, well, you've always wanted to be a writer. Now would be the time to sit down and actually write. Because I'm firmly of the belief that everybody has a writer inside them. The problem is they generally have an editor inside them, too, who strangles the writer to death before they get anything down on paper. And so I was able to wrestle that inner editor, to a standstill to actually get started on my first novel. And the other way you become a novelist is by coming up with a story that you think, needs to be told and that maybe hasn't been told before. And what I came up with is there was a young woman, a product of fetal alcohol syndrome up on the Northern Cheyenne Reservation, who's taken into a basement and abused by these 4 young men from an adjacent town. After 2 years, they basically get away with suspended sentences and then start turning up dead, shot with a .45-70 Sharps Buffalo rifle one by one. It's the worst nightmare of the sheriff of the least populated county in the least populated state in America, and that was The Cold Dish, the very first Walt Longmire novel.
Your first novel was Longmire?
Oh, yeah, that was it.
So you jumped off the cliff.
I did. I really did. And the books are written in first person. The way I write the books, it's almost as if you were to be sitting on a stool, at the Busy Bee Cafe in Durant, Wyoming, in the 24th county, Absaroka County, which does not exist. Don't look for it on a map. But you'd be sitting there at a stool, and all of a sudden the sheriff comes in and sits down on the stool next to you and says, "Let me tell you about what happened to me last month." And from that point in time, I don't want you to even remember that you're reading a book. I want you to fall into that world and be a part of it. It appears as though it's kind of struck a chord, because Walt is a little bit different from a lot of the protagonists that you tend to meet, not only in crime fiction, but also also in Westerns, because generally they tend to be the 6'2" of twisted steel and sex appeal. Every woman wanted him, every man feared him. He could kill anyone with a number 2 Ticonderoga pencil in 3.2 seconds. And I hate that guy more than anybody else in literature or cinema. And so for me, I was looking for a different kind of guy to tell the story. I was looking for somebody who was like us, and I tend to refer to Walt as over. He's overweight, he's overage, he's overly depressed, but he still gets up in the morning and tries to do the job. And, to me, that's a true hero, that's dealing with all the problems that everybody deals with. And so he's that sadder but wiser sheriff that, to me, is a little bit more fun to hang out in the head of, for 400 pages than maybe that James Bond kind of character.
How many Longmire books have you written so far now?
I've written 11 Walt Longmire books, and then also there's a collection of short stories called Wait for Signs that came out last year. And then there was a little novella called Spirit of Steamboat that was actually the first one-book Wyoming state read for the state of Wyoming, which was very exciting for me to have that happen. I traveled around all over the state last year and went to 63 libraries in one summer, including Jackson. I was actually over here like that. And it was funny because, whenever the state librarians got me started with the idea, they said, well, we're going to send you, like to Jackson and Casper and Cheyenne and Gillette and all the big towns. And I said, I don't think it's fair that a guy from a town of 25 should only go to the larger towns in Wyoming. I said, why don't we do it this way? Whichever libraries request me, I'll go to them. Like that. Well, 63 libraries requested me, and so that's how many libraries I went to in one summer.
Wow, that is wonderful. And then after you wrote your first book of Longmire, why would someone pick that up and think that would be a success?
I think that every day. Like, why would someone pick that up and try and make it a success? But that's kind of your job as a writer, though, a little bit, to the extent that it's like being a cop. When everybody's running in one direction, you need to run in the other. If you got this urge to write, zombie, vampire, YA, young adult literature, maybe you should drop that idea and do something different because that train already left the station. So I think, the job of an author is to try and think of something new, some new message, some new characters, some new design like that in which to encapsulate your writing like that. And so that's kind of what I did, when I came up with that first novel. And then, of course, the first process in getting published is you have to have an agent. There's no way that any of the big publishers will ever accept unsolicited manuscripts anymore. They just, over the transom, they just don't do it anymore simply because there are so many people attempting to try and get published like that. So it makes it a little bit difficult to introduce yourself in that fashion like that, and especially, when you're from Ucross, Wyoming, to try and introduce yourself like that. But I was bold and actually went to New York. I wrote made a bunch of phone calls like that to a lot of these offices in New York of these agents that I was interested in like that and told them I'm going to be in New York in these 3 days and I'd like to stop by and drop this manuscript off, which was a little bit more of an undertaking than perhaps it might seem because I think I made the biggest mistake that I think a lot of beginning authors make in the sense that I thought if I ever get this book published, nobody's ever going to publish anything else, so I'm putting everything in this book. So the first draft of The Cold Dish was something like 650 pages long. It was kind of like War and Peace in Absaroka County. And so they literally had to open the door a full 6 inches, to let me slide it through the door before they slammed the door in my face and said, we'll get in touch with you, kid. And I'm still waiting to hear from a lot of them like that. But there was one agent who gave me 10 minutes. She said, I can give you 10 minutes, but that's all I can give you. And I thought, well, that's 10 minutes more than anybody else has given me in the last 3 days. So I'll jump on that like a dog on a bone. And I went in, sat down, talked with her like that. And she said, well, tell me a little about the book. Tell me a little about yourself. And this 10 minutes turned into about 45 minutes. And when I got ready to leave, she said, you know what, I've got to go to the Frankfurt Book Festival, so I'm not going to get a chance to read this right off, but I will read it, and I will give you a response, which was more than anybody else was really willing to commit to. I thought that was great. And I got home, and by the time I got home, there was a message on the answering machine at the ranch, and it was the agent that I have now, and she said, don't give this to anybody else, I want it. And so she picked it up, and the first thing she said was, you need to knock about 250 pages out of this thing, which I did. And then she handed it over to Catherine Court over at Viking Penguin. And Viking Penguin picked it up and said, we'd really like some more of these. And I said, well, I'm happy to do some more books for you guys. And they said, no, I don't think you understand. We would like some more of these. We think these characters, these relationships, this place, it has something to say about the contemporary American West. And we just would like some more novels out of this. And that's when I, with the knowledge of not even having had one book published, started arguing with the president of Penguin USA, Catherine Court, and saying, I don't think that's a good idea, but I got some other ideas I want to bounce off of you. And she said, why don't you you go back to your ranch and think about this? And I did, and every day the emails come in and the cards and letters, and Warner Brothers with the television show and all of that, and the New York Times bestsellers list for the last 5 years running like that. They were right and I was wrong.
So that's kind of how it evolved into the television show series?
Mm-hmm. Yep, that's how it all kind of happened.
So the publisher actually introduced it to television?
No, actually, no. Warner Brothers got in touch with me and said that they were thinking about doing a television show based off of the books. I'd been doing a little courting dance with Hollywood, for a couple of years. A number of directors and actors and all these people had been in touch with me about doing a feature film based off of The Cold Dish. And so I'd kind of got my head wrapped around the idea that maybe someday it might, miracle of miracles, be a feature film. But a good friend of mine, Donna Dubrow, who's a producer out in Los Angeles, she said, be careful about optioning your work, because an awful lot of the time what happens is it ends up in a manila envelope in some producer's desk and never again sees the light of day. And I really wasn't interested in the money part of it. I just wanted to maybe give some more visibility to the books. I'm a cowboy writer in a town of 25, and that's not going to change. So for me, it's always going to be about the visibility for the books. And she said, see if you can get a package deal from one of the studios, because what will happen then is they'll have the producers and the writers and the directors and everybody all in place, and then I'll also provide the monetary funding to get a pilot actually done. And so I did like that. And that was when Warner Brothers came out and said, we'd like to do a TV show. And that was how Longmire got started.
How does that change your writing? Because really, they have to create a script based on the book.
Oh yeah, they do. It's according to how involved you are with the process. And I've been very, very fortunate in the people that I work with. Greer Shepard, Hunt Baldwin, John Coveney, these people that were the producers of the show, really loved the books, really loved the characters, really loved the environs, this least populated county in the least populated state in America. It's really kind of anti-CSI was what it turned out to be. And another thing is that, I remember Greer talking about it, and she said, we've kind of gone through this anti-hero thing since the 1960s, and it's done nothing but hyper-accelerate here in the last couple of decades to the point where you can't really tell the good guys from the bad guys. So I think the viewership is really kind of looking for some guy who's got a code, some guy that's a good guy. He's decent, he's kind, and he cares, and he's capable. And boy, she was right. It turned out that the TV show was the highest rated scripted drama the cable network had ever had. Then we've got a new season coming out, the 4th season of Longmire coming out on Netflix. I believe the ballpark is end of August, beginning of September. So we're all pretty well excited about that.
Oh my gosh, I'm looking forward to that. So you still own your ranch.
Uh-huh.
So how do you weave together the hard work of running a ranch with writing books?
Well, I kind of had to give up the cow part. Okay, it used to be a cow-calf operation like that, but that kind of went south, whenever the books took off, because, I think it was last year I was on the road for about 200 days out of the year,
oh my.
Which is kind of brutal like that. I mean, I wake up in the morning and, have to remind myself of where I am an awful lot of the time like that. But I still got the horses. The horses are still at the ranch, like that, and that's an important part for me because I love the riding part, along with the writing part. For me, the first thing I do in the morning, look at, is go down, square everything all away, look at the barn, feed the horses and everything. And they're my writing partners. I discuss with them what it is I'm going to be working on that day. And they're perfect writing partners because they listen very intently, but they do not offer any advice. So it's kind of a nice relationship to have. But I mean, I'm not the first author to discover that. I noticed that the magazine that you had there on the humanities, look at it had Wendell Berry on the front cover. And I think that there's a strong tradition of authors who have a rural lifestyle like that balances, a very physical lifestyle of being in the country and ranching and farming, and then also the intellectual lifestyle of going inside and actually sitting down and writing. I don't think that's unique. I think it goes all the way back to the founding fathers of the country, for gosh sakes. And it's a nice balance to have, because I think if I had to sit in front of a computer for 8 hours a day, I think I might just go crazy. But then again, ask me on days when I'm fighting with the irrigation system or the stock or the fence or whatever, and I come in, all pissed off like that, and my wife looks at me and says, "Go right," because she knows that will make it all better. And so it's a pretty good balance, I have to admit.
That is excellent. Is there any advice you'd like to share with an aspiring writer?
Well, it's going to sound hokey, but, you really got to follow your heart. It's got to be something that really comes from deep inside and something that you're going to really feel strongly about continuing on. I mean, building my ranch was probably one of the best preparations that I had as far as becoming a novelist, because I mean, I stacked logs from dawn until dusk, and here in Wyoming in the summertime, dawn till dusk is like, 5:30 a.m. until 10 o'clock at night. And I would turn around and look, and it didn't look like I'd done a damn thing like all day. And so, I kept thinking, this is probably good for me to learn a little bit of patience as far as that's concerned. But, you really got to have that jet fuel within you, a passion within you to write about something that you really feel is something you believe in, a message that you're trying to get across that's strong and that you can, they'll go the distance, I guess. And to use another horse analogy, like that are the things that you do as a writer is kind of judge your stories almost the same way that you would judge a horse. There are going to be, short track horses, good quarter horses that are good for short distance. Okay, that's a good short story or novella or something. And then you come across some of those ideas that are thoroughbred ideas, the ones that'll really go the distance. And, you got to stumble across one of those thoroughbreds. And once you do, boy, jump on and hang on tight.
Take off.
Yep.
Thank you so much. Thank you for being here with us.
My pleasure. My pleasure. It's not too many opportunities I get to talk about the actual process. So this has been wonderful for me.
I think the process is important. It's all about the humanities.
I do
Don't
too.
you think?
I agree.
Thank you so much, Craig.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of What's Your Why, a production of Think Why, Wyoming Humanities. This has been executive producer Emmy DeGrappa. Please subscribe and never miss a show. For more information, go to thinkwhy.org.